What's up guys, and welcome back to another episode of Inspired By. My name's Will and I'm making an assortment of music under the moniker Hushchild. This week I've been listening to the lush sounds of Nokiaa, and in today's video I wanted to show you how to replicate some of that lovely ear candy and Foley found in their music. And there is so much Foley in this example. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Okay, so in this track, there is so much sound design going on, or Foley or found sounds, textures for the drums, for lack of a better term. We're not really going to focus on the melodical content for this video, so I'll just highlight it real quick. We have 3 serum tracks giving us our chord layer. The first layer sounds like this. Our second sound, again, another serum layer. Just a little bit darker, got this kind of bubbly underwater tone. Lots of reverb on this one. And we have one last serum track using a line delay to make the synth sound a little bit wider. And these chords are playing up an octave from the previous 2 chords that you've listened to. You can see envelope 1 here doing all of the work to raise that volume automation. We've got this little pluck melody here. Very quick delay and reverb there. All right, my light just died. It's all good. And then a basic sub sign. It's got a quick attack so it doesn't double up with the kick drum too much. And we're using the EQ8 just to roll off some of those harmonics. So as I mentioned, the chords aren't too important to today's tutorial. That's what they sound like as a whole to accompany all these lovely textures. And I basically have 2 main groups. I've got the Foley texture group, and then I have everything else. When we put those 2 groups together, this is what we're left with. So to help you train your ears, what I would suggest is go back to the beginning of the video, listen to the preview, and take a note of just how many Foley sounds you can hear amongst the mix. That's exactly what I did with Nokiaa's track Aware, and I was just so surprised. Every time it came to dropping in a new sound or searching up a sound, I was just finding more and more. Obviously, extremely important and most easy is just finding a nice round kick. I really enjoyed this Manny Fresh kick. To get it sounding a little bit more round, I just got rid of some of these harmonics around 800 and then rolled off some of the extreme highs here. Did a little bit of soft clipping with the saturator as well. On the rimshot side of things, I've got this lovely Soundsmith's rimshot with a tiny little bit of Valhalla reverb, like 5.2%. Utility to keep that rimshot in mono. We have one decap clap here, just offset from that rimshot a little bit. And you can see that I'm using a line delay to just make it a little bit wider. And another decap clap here. Again, offset from the previous 2 tracks with a little bit of a high pass EQ. And I've pitched that clap up a little bit as well. Those rims together make this lovely stacked layer. One of the main sounds that I could hear throughout Nokiaa's mix was this water or stream loop. So I actually wanted to make it rhythmical, which is why you can see this little chop around about here. And I used freesound.org to find these samples. Splice is fantastic for one-shot drum samples and music, but it can be hard to find any special effects, found sounds, or Foley. So for anything that's been field recorded, I'll go to Freesound. So you can see that I've got this crazy high pass EQ going on there on the mid-side mode, just to make sure that there's not too much information in the sideband profiles, but it does still sound quite wide. You can see that it's being sidechained by the kick. I'm just upping the gain a little bit because I do have a tiny bit of automation there. I'm just using the utility to bring up 2 dB. Playing with that water field recording are the chimes as well. And I noticed that these kind of faded in, but they also had a little bit of reverb at the tail end. So this is what I've done with my chimes. They fade in. And then just here, I turn on or up the mix for the Valhalla reverb. So you get dry chimes, and then you get this boost of volume, and you hear the reverb of the chimes. We've got this Medicine Foley, which I did get from Splice, which plays either side of the snare hits. It's just a little textured roll into that snare hit. I've used 1, 2, 3 unique samples, and this third one is just a copy of the first. So there's a little bit of a loop there, but there's a little bit of differentiation as well. One of my favorite sounds that I didn't spot until later, and this might not be spot on, there's a percussive instrument that we use in schools in the UK, and I think it's called a wooden frog. Shout out in the comments if you know the name of this instrument. I went to Free Sound once again and found that croaky percussion and just used the auto pan to keep it playing left then right, EQ'd it a little bit and then upped the gain with the utility here because once again I'm doing some volume automation all the way through. And that will conclude the pink section, which are the drums that are doing all the heavy lifting. So that just leaves us with our Foley textures. And even listening to them now, with all the names listed at the side, it's quite overwhelming to how many found sounds are in this track. There's a little bit more of a mixing technique that goes into these sounds in this group to make sure that the sounds aren't all stacking up on top of each other. You don't want a cacophony of textures. You want it to be fairly subtle. And I had a great time listening to Nokiaa's track and trying to pinpoint what all these sounds were. You want your listeners to have a similar adventure when they listen to your song. So one of the first sounds that I wanted was the clinks. The clinks are just ceramic dishware. To get the sound that I wanted, just make sure you double click on these sounds, hit warp, beats, transients, the forward envelope, and pull that envelope all the way to 0. It's going to get rid of all of that excess overtone. That makes it a lot more tasteful. You can see that I'm high passing this to the extreme as well. One of the things that stood out to me most in the song Aware was the stapler pan to the right a little bit. So again, I've just isolated a couple of those one shots and made sure it's panned to the right. We've done some work with the hi-hat. As you can see, I've deactivated quite a lot of clips. Originally, the hi-hat was running throughout the entire drum stem, but it was just too much. And then after some time, I chopped it up even more because I realized, as you'll see, we had some shakers that were landing on the downbeat. Once again, no surprise, it's high pass. Now where things start to change is I'm actually side chaining from the clinks track up here. I didn't want the hi-hats to play when you were hearing the sounds of the dishware. So I'm making sure I side chain those sounds right out anytime you hear any of that ceramic ware. Okay, so now we're on to the shakers that fall on the downbeat, and we're doing the exact same thing as we did with the hi-hats, but this time we're adding a second sidechain compressor as we don't want that second shaker to play as loud when it falls with the stapler. And then we have a second shaker sound that's been EQ'd a little bit differently. It's a separate sample and it plays mostly outside of those downbeat shakes that you hear. Let's just have a real quick recap of those 5 sounds. So let's move to the noise, which I'm using in place of an open hi-hat. Open hi-hats are often super crunchy, and we want these to be subtle, but just really pleasurable to the ear. So I'm using a little bit of white noise, and you can see I've got a louder hit, then a kind of small middle section. I'm utilizing the gain to turn down some of the volume there. And then I have 0 dB for the last section of the noise, which I'm just manually fading out here. And you'll also notice that I'm using EQ automation to make sure again that I can draw in the exact sound that I want. Let's combine that with the hats. And then I have a slightly quicker piece of noise in the second bar, which utilizes the same effect. I've just drawn a slightly different pattern. To feed into that noise a little bit better, I realized the sound was kind of reminiscent to paper being slid across the table. So that's the exact sound that I got. And you can tell that I've stretched that sound out just a little bit as well. Let's combine that with the open hat. And then coming towards the end, I have an egg shaker sound, plays at the start of the second bar, and at the start of the fourth bar, I have a separate egg shaker sample. And they'll just be kind of percussive drum fills throughout the beat. To top everything off, I've got just these 2 bongo hits with 5% reverb at the very end. The very last step was to add a little bit of noise on the chords and completing the loop. You can see here that I'm just automating the EQ ever so slightly, and I'm using 3 sidechain compressors. One just going to the kick, which is kind of self-explanatory. We want to duck some of that noise every time the kick's played. But 2 of the sidechain compressors are going to each of these noise tracks that you've just heard. Once again, I don't want to double up on all the noise that you're going to hear inside the track. You don't want a cacophony of noise. Finally, inside that Foley texture group, I'm EQing all of that Foley so it sits together more as a family, and I'm using the multi-band compression tool on sidechain mode so that when the kick plays, some of these frequencies are just ducked ever so slightly whilst the other frequencies are free to come through the mix. I'm using a line delay on this entire group to make it a little bit wider than the pink group that's doing all the heavy lifting. And then finally, I'm making sure that there's a limiter there, but really the limiter only seems to kick in when that singular stapler plays. So we're just keeping that squashed down in the mix too. And that pretty much concludes all of the sounds that are here. Just make sure that when you're constructing your track, you have a reference track where you can go from A to B and listen to your track and try to make it more in keeping with the place that you got your inspiration. I hope that was helpful, guys. Let's have a listen to it one more time. So there we have it. What did you think of today's video? Did you make it to this point? Do let me know. And whilst you're down there, let me know what should be on my radar for future tutorials. Don't forget, we have a lo-fi focus playlist well on its way to 1,000 followers with way more monthly listeners. If you want to be part of that lo-fi focus playlist, then make sure you find the form in the description below, as well as anything else that you might want to find mentioned in this video or previous. For now, guys, I thank you so much for being here. If it was helpful, do give a subscribe so you can find us next time, and I will see you next week.